Hey guys, you ever think about dying? Was that real talk? A little too often. 2 months ago, when I first started sketching out the sermon series for September, which I've called Loving the Hell Out of the World, I wanted the series to move through 4 different stages, each building on the previous. So in August, we started with faith, right? What it means to be a believer. Because you are a believer, even if it doesn't align with what the dominant religions define belief or faith. And then last week we talked about wisdom, because faith needs to be informed by wisdom, right? Faith on its own leads to authoritarianism. We must apply experience and insight gained both from our lives and from the people who've mentored us, because together, faith and wisdom form our moral vision. This is how I understand the cosmos. This is what I see happening around me, which helps me determine if what I'm seeing is good or bad. And we'll be exploring that a little bit today. And the final stage, the final sermon in the series, which happens to be next week, is about justice. Because simply having a moral vision, simply proclaiming something is good or bad, is not enough. Action is important. A moral vision without action is anemic and perhaps even fraudulent. Now, I would say specifically here within the Unitarian Universalist context, for us, right, we would say it's fraudulent because our belief, our faith, is that we are all interwoven. Right? We are all interdependent on one another. Meaning, whatever I do, however I live, impacts you. It impacts how you live. And we have to be responsible for the systems that we cooperate with. None of us are above the systems of our culture, whether they be ecological, political, economic, or cultural. We are cooperating within systems. We are giving our consent to these systems, and some of these systems are driving us towards a greater experience of life, and some are driving us towards death. As Unitarian Universalists, our faith says we are interwoven. Our wisdom tells us that there is a way to transform systems by lending our consent or removing it, depending on what that particular system is doing. And our morality says that many of the systems we're cooperating with are actually cultures of death. Sometimes they feel like death cults, right? Because we are living within an obsession of death. And there's a reason for that, but we'll get to that in just a minute. But that line, hey guys, do you ever think about dying? Well, I lifted that from one of the opening scenes of the new Barbie movie, which many of you told me this morning that since I sent out that video you went to see. Some of you had already seen it. Gold star. If you haven't seen it already, I implore you to go see it, because whatever you think the Barbie movie is about, it's not that. It feels good, and it's really pink. And it's about how to live a good life by understanding death. Back in July, when I was pulling together the sermon ideas from Mark and Ann, my intention originally was to compare Barbie and Oppenheimer, the 2 movies marketed together beneath that catchy sobriquet, Barbenheimer, which exploded onto the world, seemingly offering us a choice between profound, thoughtful critique and stylized fluff. The great twist, of course, being that it was Nolan's Oppenheimer that was relatively shallow, although beautifully filmed, and Barbie that is a journey into what it means to be alive, what it means to be free, and what is worth dying for. Now, the simple answer to the question, we've already heard it, right? Guys, do you ever think about dying? The answer, of course, is yes. Yes, I do. And we start thinking about death as soon as we learn about it, which is why so many children's books and Disney movies explore the topic. Not only are children curious about it, but intuitively we know that death is really important for understanding the value of life. But as we grow older, the constant presence of the great question of death wears on us. So we find a box to kind of put it in and close the lid. So, we can think about really important things like resenting people and buying stuff. But when we put the great question of death in a box, when we banish it from our theological reflection, we shift from living in a way that creates meaning for us and for others to living in a way that is about accumulation, regardless of whether it's status or material, because it becomes important to know if I'm going to get mine in this life. Conquest and domination becomes the frame, whether it is played out on the family or at church or globally. We are no longer playing an infinite game when we've put it in the box, the infinite game of meaning. We are playing a finite game of acquiring power. And we've become so comfortable playing this finite game because much of the religious culture we live with, here in the West anyway, focuses on everlasting life. It's a religious construct that tries to resolve our anxiety about death by telling us that there's a way not to die, to live forever. Some places you get your own planet. I just learned about this in Salt Lake. And you stay with your family forever, which was enough for me to be like, no way am I ever being a convert. But when you've got this promise of conquering death, dominating death, people shift to living for the promise instead of living for what's happening right now. Now, I'm going to betray my bias in that I don't know what happens when you die. Gasp. And my bias is I don't think anybody actually knows. But you are going to die. And I am going to die. And it's really important to know that we're going to die, you and I, we, so that we can live well now. So that we can live with meaning now. The Oppenheimer movie is really about which man is going to come out on top and whose name is going to be remembered. It is a blatant redemption story for a man that Christopher Nolan deeply respects, but it does not invite us into deep reflection. Barbie is about the beautiful transformation of a woman who embraces her death in order to really live. It's the rejection of the life, of the idea of an everlasting life in order to live a meaningful life. If you want to love the hell out of this world, you have to make loving it a discipline. Just about 10 years ago, I started this church in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, because I was a hipster back then. I was much cooler than I am now. But I started it, I was really influenced by a book by a theologian, former priest named Matthew Fox. His book was called Original Blessing, and I named the church the same thing, Original Blessing. And I want to share a passage with you today that continues to inform how I understand the world and my role as a minister, well over a decade later. It reads, on his deathbed, the great psychologist and lover of the human race, Erich Fromm, turned to his friend Robert Fox and asked, why is it that the human race prefers necrophilia to biophilia? Significant question. Why do we prefer love of death to love of life? Missiles to celebration, power over to power with, greed to letting go. Fox continues, Western civilization has preferred the love of death to the love of life to the very extent that its religious traditions have preferred redemption to creation, sin to ecstasy, and individual introspection to cosmic awareness and appreciation. Religion has failed the people in the West as often as it has been silent about pleasure and about cosmic creation and the ongoing power of the flowing energy of the Creator, about original blessing. If the failure of religion in the West is one very basic reason for our culture's love of death, then the recovery of a creation-grounded spirituality promises newness and renewal to society, provided this recovery is not too late and it is not thwarted by backward-leaning battles of tired fall redemption theological preoccupations. My humble translation of this passage is simply, the apocalypse is not a foreordained conclusion, whether it's biblical or ecological. It is not a foreordained conclusion. Visions of the apocalypse are merely evidence of a mind that is in the grips of nihilism, that is not channeling the creative power of the universe. We've got serious work, but nihilism is our enemy. There is another solution. We can fall in love, and through our obsessive love of life, we will channel creation's powers. I want to be cautious, right? Because falling in love with life is not facile. It sounds easy. Oh, let's just fall in love with life. It's not that easy. And many of us who want to engage, there are many people who want to engage in these backward-leaning battles of tired redemption, fall redemption theological preoccupations. And our work is cut out for us. So as much as I consider Nolan's Oppenheimer a flashy but ultimately dull piece of filmmaking, it actually does, on one level, tell us the truth about the nature of our culture in a way that the Barbie movie does not. And so there were two examples, really, for me. Before the Barbies can retake Barbie Land, those of you who saw this, right, and restore the matriarchy, they must first deprogram the Barbies who've fallen under the spell of patriarchy. And they do this because Gloria, the human woman who journeyed back to Barbie Land with her daughter, she's able to break the spell through a series of celebrated monologues of how tough it is to be a woman, with the unfair expectations and the impossible standards that women are asked to live up to. And as one Barbie after another wakes up from her beer-serving, foot-rubbing hibernation, they concoct a plan to return to power through the ballot box. Which they do, and it was awesome. But in the real world, we know that patriarchal power does not concede so easily and often change the rules to perpetuate the system. And women are murdered by men, usually their partners, for speaking out about the injustices that they face in the way that Gloria does. Right? I don't fault the Barbie movie for not diving into the issues of violence, because the message is really elsewhere. I'm just saying we have some bigger hurdles here than the Hollywood movie. And patriarchy reserves punishment for men as well. After the fall of patriarchy in Barbie, our hero finds Ken crying on the bed, and she tries to reassure him, and he responds by saying, I'm a liberated man. I know crying's not weak. It was beautiful. It was a pretty awesome moment. But probably what's more accurate is what we see in the scene from Oppenheimer when he meets President Truman in the Oval Office. At this point, Oppenheimer is deeply conflicted about his work, realizing too late, actually, that it was not some scientific puzzle to be cracked, but a vehicle for mass death that now lies in the hands of morally decadent and paranoid men. And his advocacy for arms controls is rebuffed by Truman, who sneers, "Do you think that anyone in Hiroshima or Nagasaki cares who built the bomb? They care who dropped it. Hiroshima isn't about you." And then ejects him from the Oval Office, saying to his aide as he goes, "Don't let that crybaby back in here again." If there's anything that we should be crying about, it's the amount of murder that we inflict on one another just so we can win this meaningless landscape of the finite game where we are set out to conquer ourselves because we believe some story about who we are, that those people over there that we're trying to conquer are not actually us. Crying is the right response to this ludicrous and delusional self-harm. And we might prefer the fantasy in Barbie. We might even strive for that. But in our striving, we must confront the patriarchy we are living with. A patriarchy imbued with a misogyny and emasculation. A patriarchy Adrian Rich has called a fatalistic self-hatred. One that has affected us all. Everyone in this culture has drunk from the same well. Worship of death is a central component of patriarchal thinking, whether it's expressed by women or men, writes Bell Hooks. Choosing to love the hell out of this world is not easy. It's hard. And part of this is because we've been set up. That is, we set up ourselves, because the people that set us up are the same as us, right? We set up ourselves. And again, I want to be cautious because religion bashing is so common in youth circles, right? Not often that insightful. It's not that guided by wisdom. Instead, it's guided by a deep sense of pain and trauma that many of us experienced when we were younger. And so now we bash back at the people who called us sinners by calling them liars. But really, it's just another game, a version of that finite game of conquering, of conquest. This isn't to say that the pain and trauma aren't real, but the finite game of conquest doesn't actually resolve the trauma. It just helps us feel self-righteous. But we'll get to this in a couple of weeks at the next sermon series. So come back. All I'm saying is I want to be cautious because we must address the setup we live with without sliding back into the same dynamic of conquest that we're trying to escape. So here's the setup, right? Most of this works through the frame of Christianity because that's the culture that dominates this nation, but in other parts of the world it has a different name, but the setup is the same. And this isn't true for all Christians out there. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying you'll understand it when I say it, right? There is a story of a perfect God who created a perfect cosmos. And within this perfect cosmos, God created perfect humans. The problem was that the perfect humans behaved badly, imperfectly, and now we have thrown the whole cosmos into imperfection. And here the setup sort of differs depending on your region, but ultimately, a perfect intermediator is introduced with a set of perfect rules for us to live by, so that we can follow these rules and be in relationship with this perfect God. But what actually happens is we all end up living with profound insecurity because there is no perfect person. And there is no perfect set of rules. And there's no perfect intermediator. And there is no perfect God. Not in the way that the narrative has been told. I want to be clear. I believe in God. I believe in an interwoven experience that is larger than this finite body that is going to die. But it has nothing to do with the human concept of perfection. It's simply a projection derived from our insecurity. And this is one of the reasons I love Barbie so much, the Barbie movie. Barbie meets her creator. Remember that? She meets her creator, who in this cosmos is called Ruth. And they have this amazing exchange where the creator says, being a human can be pretty uncomfortable. Humans make things up like patriarchy and Barbie, just to deal with how uncomfortable it is, and then you die. Humans have only one ending: ideas live forever. And unfortunately, it is this idea of perfection, whether it is religious or whether it is Barbie, that has been making us feel insecure. Which brings us to the point, in my opinion, of the movie. Barbie chooses her own death so she can actually live her life. She lovingly tells her creator, I want to be part of the people that make meaning. Not the thing that's made. I want to do the imagining. I don't want to be the idea. She leaves Barbie land for good, choosing the real world despite its very real undertone of violence. With her final transformation coming in as comedy, where she reveals at the very last scene that she is going to see her gynecologist. Right? It's a wonderful moment, but it's like, we laugh, but it's like, you are a woman now. You're not this idea. And she learned the value of participating in the liberation of her community in Barbie land. She leaves the idea of perfection so she can live fully as a woman, as a human, being imperfect as we may be with our flat feet and our cellulite. But it wasn't the restoration of the matriarchy that actually liberated her. Does anybody want to take a guess at what was the moment that liberated her? Well, you were raised Unitarian Universalist. That's true, but there's a moment. It was the bus stop. Do you remember the bus stop? She's sitting at the bus stop, and much like the Buddha's earlier awakening, she had just witnessed this montage of people arguing, loving each other, and being lonely and just fighting. And she witnessed the full spectrum of human emotions, and she cries for the first time in her life because she is present to what it means to be alive with all of the heartbreak and all of the joy. And with tears still on her cheeks, she witnesses an old woman sitting next to her. And Barbie says, "You are so beautiful." And the woman responds, "I know it. I know it." That was the moment of her liberation. The director of Barbie, Greta Gerwig, had to fight for that scene. She had to fight for it. She's quoted as saying, it's a cul-de-sac of a moment, right? It doesn't lead anywhere. We never see the old woman again. And in earlier cuts, it was suggested, well, you could cut it, and actually the story would move on just the same. And she says, if I cut the scene, I don't know what the movie's about. To me, this is the heart of the movie. It is in this moment that Barbie learns to walk away from the narrative of insecurity. It is the moment that Barbie learns that she can walk away from the idea of her creator. The first step in any love story is self-love. You cannot love the world if you cannot love yourself. You cannot love the world if you cannot love yourself. And there are a lot of people trying to love the world, but they don't love themselves. And it's brought us to the point of annihilation. We are too insecure to love ourselves. We want to be the wise old woman, the crone, the voice of Sophia, inviting us to know that we are beautiful just as we are. But it takes some practice to walk away from the narrative of insecurity, of that finite game that we will always lose. So let's practice a little today. I'm going to say, "You are so beautiful." Also Unitarian Universalist. I love it. So here we go. You are so beautiful. Let's do it again. You are so beautiful. If you're watching from home, we're going to do it one more time. If you have not joined in already, you're not saying it for me to hear. You're saying it for the whole world to hear, and it starts with you. So here we go. You are so beautiful. This is not just the heart of the movie, it is the heart of life. It is easier to say when I'm prompting you, but to live it takes some practice, right? In an interview with Matthew Fox, he says, necrophilia grows when biophilia is stunted. It's a very profound statement on evil. It shows us the way out of necrophilia. Life is really about biophilia. We have to fall in love with life on a regular basis. And I say we should fall in love 3 times a day. And I don't say that to threaten anyone's marriage or relationship, but to get us out of our anthropocentric, I'm going to get there. Say it with me. It's the community liberation I live for. It gets us out of that thing. You can fall in love with wildflowers and trees and stones and animals, with planets and galaxies, with music and poetry. There is so much to fall in love with. I think when there's enough falling in love going around, we will choose biophilia, the love of life, over necrophilia. So go fall in love today. Go fall in love today, at least 3 times. Let go of this mindset that puts us at the center. Fall in love with this beautiful world, with this beautiful cosmos that does include beautiful human beings. Some of whom just don't know it yet. Some of whom they just haven't met you yet. Liberation is not an individual affair. We are all interwoven. Our salvation from the apocalypse is not about adhering to right rules. It is about loving the hell out of this world. But every love story begins with self-love. You are so beautiful.